The chair now recognizes the ranking member, Ms. Cammack, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And you hit on one of the issues that I really wanted to bring to light and discuss today, which is the challenges that some of our rural communities have with these grants. So many of them are really just unattainable from a number of vantage points. One being they don't meet the requirements in Putnam County, for example, and Sheriff DeLoach can speak to this. We have the main city, Palaco, which is exactly 400 people over the threshold for certain grants for low population areas. So because of that, they have the exact same struggles that very small rural communities have, but that 400 person over the limit has excluded them from a number of grants, putting them in a pile to compete with cities like Jacksonville or Orlando or Miami. So Sheriff DeLoach, I'd love for you to just touch on this. I just went through about 28 pages of available grants through DHS. And it looks like Putnam County and several of the rural communities, and as was mentioned earlier, 97% of America is rural. 1 in 5 Americans live in rural America. And when you look at that list of available DHS grants, communities and rural communities only are eligible to apply to about 10 to 15% of those. Can you talk about how you guys are getting creative and what we could be doing to open up that grant a little bit more so that we're covering both the urban areas, but also the rural communities?
Certainly, and I'll say this as a qualifier prior to answering the questions. Certainly when it comes to grants and reporting requirements, I understand the need for accountability. But whenever I manage an organization like mine, where we have 256 full-time employees, a complete complement of 308 full and part-time employees. It's difficult when you contrast us with someone down in South Florida where they have a staff and several thousand people and perhaps an entire floor in a building dedicated to management of grants. Unfortunately, those are just resources that we don't have available to us. And like you just said a few minutes ago, because of the quagmire that we're placed in because of that awkward stage in growth where we are now, it knocks us out of eligibility for many of them. So I would ask each of you to reconsider those eligibility requirements to open them up to some of rural America so that we have access to that money.
Thank you, Sheriff. And this question is for Chief Lombard. So in your testimony, you had highlighted that SAFECOM had been critical to improving interoperability. You also highlighted how SAFECOM is one of the first organizations to bring together representatives from public safety associations as well as emergency responders in the field. Can you talk a little bit more about how important it is to have buy-in from the emergency responders in the field and across all spectrums, rank and file, all the way up to management, when discussing things like SAFECOM or the National Emergency Communications Plan? And as a caveat to that, can you also talk about, from your perspective, do you think that rural America is represented accurately and adequately in these discussions when you're building this out?
Absolutely. So one of the key points that you captured on, Congresswoman, was that first response is only effective in so much as the secondary response is able to sustain the events. So one of the things that SAFECOM has done that has been so well received is to actually bring in those other parties. So for example, a dear friend of mine, Philip Mann, who's the Public Works Director at Gainesville, Florida, represents Public Works throughout the United States, recognizing that, when we're talking about interoperability issues, when we're talking about sustaining the response that police, fire, and EMS and 911 are doing, being able to bring in experts like Director Mann and talk about, okay, if you want to keep the water on the big fire, if you want to keep the roads open, how are we going to be able to, how communicate to us and for continuing that dialogue. SAFECOM really strives to maintain a really diverse group as far as, again, federal, state, local people are brought together, responders are brought together, not just big cities. There's a lot of smaller, more rural areas that are brought together too, because one of the things that we find at the end of the day is that even though some of us are bigger or smaller, so many of these issues are the same. It's just a matter of scaling. the western United States, 50% or almost 50% of the land is all federal out here. So you don't have to go too far outside of the big cities on the West Coast before you get into some very rural area. And as you know, with the wildland fires every year, we're going there a lot. So it's, again, the funding and the support that the federal government has gotten or put forth on helping us facilitate those relationships. I think the bang for the buck that we've been getting is just amazing as far as bringing us together and letting us collectively work our problems out. Hopefully that answers your question.
Oh, no, that does. And thank you, Chairwoman Demings, and thank you to all of our witnesses here today. This is an issue that is important in every single one of our congressional districts, and we want to make sure that we're working effectively and efficiently in delivering real solutions that meet the needs on the ground. So I look forward to continuing that work, and thank you, Congresswoman Demings and Chairwoman, for allowing a second round of questions.